Hello and welcome to Second Year Radio. My name is Sharita and you might remember me from First Year Radio or you might not, but I'll be your second year lecturer and I'll introduce myself in person next week when we see each other in class. But for now, this is the first lecture of the year, so I'm quickly going to do a run through with you with regards to what the year will look like. But also, if at any point you need to get a hold of any information, everything is on Cole Campus, okay? Everything will be loaded under your modules on Cole Campus, so you can just go there for information. You can leave a message for me there as well, which I get via email, so I'll respond to it immediately or as soon as I receive it. Alternatively, you can send me an email. The email address is in the PowerPoint if you need to get a hold of me at any point. But let's have a look at that first PowerPoint. Okay, so today we're going to be starting with researching the audience, which will form part of 5 lectures. And we're starting on page 410, which is chapter 11 in your textbook, Next Level Radio. But let's quickly run through this. So this year we will have 84 lectures. All 84 of these will be an hour and a half long. Okay, there's my email address for you. So sharita@mediabeat.co.za. You need to have 2 textbooks. Please make sure you have 2 textbooks from the start, not only 1. So you need to have Next Level Radio by Grant Nash and Justine Cullinan, but you also need to make sure that you have Beyond Powerful Radio from Valerie Geller. Okay. Apart from that, for these 5 lessons, you'll need to go and have a look on the BRC's website, specifically at the radio section, okay? Then you need to go and have a look at David Lloyd's Listeners Always Right, How Research is Used. The link to that is at the end of your textbook, the Next Level Radio one. And then you need to look at targeting, who is your listener, in How to Make Great Radio, page 231 and page 169. So if we start at the basics of researching the radio audience, like any business, radio stations want to understand their audience. In the case of a commercial radio station, understanding the audience is doubly important because the station needs to make its listeners and clients equally happy in order to drive both its content and its revenue goals. So the better the station knows what its audience's needs are, the better it will be able to satisfy these needs, and the more likely it will be to hold on to that audience and attract new audience members so it can then sell to clients, okay, to advertisers. In order to understand their audience, stations need to do research. There are numerous approaches to research, and radio stations all over the world make use of these approaches to seek out data about their audiences. The various approaches can take the form of national research studies conducted by independent research houses. We'll talk about South Africa's one in a little bit, and corporate companies, as well as smaller studies, which can be conducted by groups of radio stations or broadcast conglomerates. Many radio stations also access broader research reports in order to help them understand larger population dynamics, such as what people fear the most, what types of topics they are most interested in, and what they spend most of their free time doing. The most important aspect to bear in mind regarding research is the source of that research. All research, no matter how carefully managed and objective its methodology, is designed and directed toward a certain goal by the company or the group of people who are paying for it. This is not a problem if, as an individual, you are aware of the objectives of the research and you bear them in mind when you analyze them. Habits are often difficult for people to break, and change is something that many listeners try to resist. It means that building new habits aren't easy, and the process takes time. Many people who listen to radio today grew up listening to radio. Their habits of listening while doing certain activities or during certain group occasions were established early on in their lives and may have been passed on to their kids. So, for example, large groups of South Africans grew up listening to Metro FM. And to this day, when people of all ages in the Metro FM audience are asked why they listen to this specific national station, many explain that it was a tradition in their household growing up. These listeners are simply familiar with participating in certain activities and family gatherings with the sound of Metro FM playing in the background. Today, radio stations are competing with a large number of alternate audio services like podcasts, internet streaming services, music subscription applications, to name a few. This means that there are generations of people who are growing up not listening to the radio. Rather, they are finding their news, music, information, etc. from other sources, predominantly the internet. As a result, radio stations are under pressure to understand their audience in even more detail in order to provide a service that is as appealing to the audience as possible. The need for accurate and relevant research that is valid and reliable is more necessary than it's ever been before. Okay? So it's extremely important that we have the relevant, necessary information about our listeners. So research. So who's listening? It may be difficult to believe that millions of people can find value in listening to a single radio station together, considering that we all have individual tastes and preferences. People generally don't behave in line with strict group characteristics, but there are common themes that appeal to everyone. It is these themes that radio stations focus on as their expertise. If you think about some of these themes that people might find inspiring, you'll realize that stories of people succeeding despite adverse odds are universally appealing. We all love those underdog stories. Similarly, most people might find topics like factual information about finances and health very helpful, especially in the last 2 years when it comes to health, as these are universally interesting topics and they're relevant currently. It is this type of information that becomes very important to radio stations. In order to ensure that they deliver the right content to their audiences and to position themselves in the market to attract more listeners, radio stations need to generate interesting topics that will appeal to the majority of their listeners. Building on the idea that people don't behave only as defined by individual groups, it's important to remember that demographics can limit our view of segmentation and can only get us so far in terms of understanding mass groups of audiences. Demographics as a concept derives from the study of demography, which is the science of analyzing the sizes and compositions of populations. So the size of the population is an aggregate, a total number that is made up of many parts. It records the number of people living in a specific area at a specific point in time. Demographics also look at the distribution of a population, such as how densely people are living together and whether they live in rural or metropolitan areas. The composition of the population looks at factors like the sex, ethnicity, and age of the population. It's very important to remember that demography is the study of aggregates, not individuals. This means that demographics look at average data from groups of people, and the data may not represent an individual's experience. So, for example, a population might be more female than male in terms of sex. However, this does not necessarily mean that the women in the population experience a society free from patriarchal influence of power. When you think about it, it's a significant assumption to believe that people of the same racial groups or sex will have the same needs and interests. Everybody has lived a different life, even brothers and sisters who grew up in the same house. In Valerie Geller's book on page 499, she says, the belief that people make buying decisions based on a common set of needs defined by age, income, sex, and ethnic groups is not valid. People have more choices about the ways they live and make buying decisions based on whole new sets of additional criteria. It's very important to realize that different groups of people have vastly different experiences and interests. So let's say I'm in the group of 30-somethings. So within this group of 30-somethings, there will be people in the market for all types of products and services, ranging from creches to restaurants to food delivery services to plumbers to home insurance to furniture. If you select one individual from that group, however, they might be more interested in the last 3 products than the first 3, and they might prefer to eat out than eat at home. We do, however, group these unique 30-somethings together. Similarly, a group of people who identify themselves as female or a group of people who are all students might have a lot in common, but they will also have very different circumstances and needs. Therefore, it's important to understand an audience in much more detail than simply collecting them into groups based on their demographics. It's not only the statistical data about their lives that determines what they buy and what they prioritize. It's the phase where they are in their specific life at this point that will do this. So by now you might be wondering then how it is that a radio station can actually appeal to a mass market, a mass audience. So broadly speaking, this is done in 2 ways. The first way is by finding topics and themes that most people are concerned with. So things like tax, politics, current affairs that affect the way that people live their lives and stories that make them feel good. And secondly, by generating a radio show style, either with a single presenter or a group of presenters and contributors on a specific show. This style presents alternative viewpoints and develops characters that different types of audiences can identify with. News and talk radio stations make good use of the first method of entertaining and informing their audiences. They specialize in wrapping up bite-sized pieces of information, explaining complex ideas in a way that is easy for all types of people to understand. And sorting out what is important and relevant for people to know and what isn't. Music and lifestyle radio stations are known to position their presenters in such a way that they can pick up different viewpoints. Larger teams usually present the morning and the afternoon drive shows and will take different outlooks on an issue, debate it on air amongst themselves, and then often invite listeners to call in or share their views on social media in order to display a variety of options, so a variety of opinions and experiences as a segment. Consider a topic like your first day of school. On a morning drive show, this topic could be raised by one of the on-air team members who has just experienced preparing their child for their first day of school. That would mean that they could share their experiences and tell the story of dropping off the child for their first day of school. And this is an experience that many people in the target market could relate to. Older parents will remember their own experiences, and newer parents will either feel informed about what to expect or be able to compare their current situation, so their current experience, to the presenter's experience. This will bring the content of the show closer to the broad audience we can label as parents. But what about those who aren't parents? The show can handle this by selecting another member of the on-air team to take a different viewpoint. That presenter could add context as an aunt or an uncle or as a friend. They could also tell a story of their own first day of school by remembering their own experiences, or telling a story of what their own parents or guardians told them on their first day of school. The not a parent member of the team could also simply position themselves in opposition to the discussion by making comments about how they don't miss those types of experiences, so the experiences that parents seem to have. They might explain how they didn't stay up late on a Sunday evening baking cupcakes for the class so that other kids could be welcoming towards their child. So this creates an opposing idea, which appeals to listeners who may otherwise not feel represented by the discussion. Presenting an opposing viewpoint will generate an experience and a story that the group of listeners who are labeled not parents can relate to. This gives us a broad spectrum of viewpoints that provides context, relevance, information, and entertainment wrapped up into an enjoyable and interesting radio segment. The types of audiences who have gained something from the first day of school discussion include new parents, old parents, future parents, not parents, children listening with parents. This means that by targeting a specific milestone, so children going to their first day of school, we have also managed to entertain a wider audience who's not specifically experiencing the same milestone. So before a radio station embarks on radio-specific research, it's always worthwhile to first look what research has already been done. So find existing research first. All research, when simplified, is asking carefully considered questions, collecting and compiling answers from a sample of specifically selected people, and then interpreting and analyzing the result of that research. If you don't ask the right questions or you don't ask the right people, you won't get reliable results. If you collect a set of results, there will only ever be words and numbers on a page until you understand how to interpret them and how they can contribute to your business. It's important to know upfront that research does not predict which course of action a business should take. If research is done correctly, it helps to understand the audience's needs better, so that you can either fill a gap in their experience or ensure that you are spending more time and effort giving them what they like and want. So when it comes to research, there are two types of data that we try to collect. The first one is qualitative data, and the second one is quantitative data. So this is just a very quick summary about what they are. I will be chatting about them a little bit more in detail for you, as both of these are extremely important for you to understand. Qualitative data is a type of data that describes information. So think about it in terms of the quality. Quantitative data is something that is able to be measured. So quantity, so numbers. For qualitative research, we use focus groups. So we'll ask things like your sex and the favorite song that you like listening to currently on the radio station, okay? Versus quantitative research, where we'll do a large sample procedures. So this is where we'll look at how many, how often. So if you said this was your favorite song, here we would ask how often do you listen to it, for instance. People love looking at research. We open the newspaper or the magazine or watch TV, and we love looking at who's doing what. We like statistics, metrics, finished products, results. Most of us know it's not the data, but how one interprets the data that counts. Applying research to radio is a challenge. It's the easiest with a music radio station. You ask a group of people what they think about a song, a performing artist, or a jingle. Interpreting personality or news/talk radio stations, however, is a little bit more difficult. Why? Because you can research only what has gone before. There's no way to predict in a research study what people are going to respond to tomorrow, okay? Working in talk radio is not for the faint-hearted. It elicits strong reactions from people. Your listeners will either love or hate you. They're active and they'll let you know how they feel with calls, with emails, with SMSs, WhatsApps, telegrams, flowers, boycotts, threats, etc. One clear difference, though, between news or talk programming research and music programming research is the polarization in news and talk radio can be a good thing. Strong listener reactions to a news/talk personality, whether positive or negative, is good, provided that there's a balance. Listeners are creatures of habit. They do not like change. They like things the old way, the way it's always been. While some behavior can immediately be altered, it takes 1,000 repetitions before a human's brain is rewired to change. And this includes changing listeners' habits. It's only when the new way has a chance to kick in that it becomes a habit for a new listener. So one, when it becomes a habit for the listener. So if they don't like the host today, they might tomorrow. And if they hate him, but they listen, that's okay. In just about every radio market, you can hear the story of a beloved host whose name is known to all in the community, but who's listened to by very few. What research can do is help you understand your audience and their lifestyles. It can answer questions like, how can my station better serve my audience? Or what have they responded to in the past? You might be surprised to learn what does not change. No matter the delivery system, people will listen or watch when you talk about things like health or safety, heart, so emotional stories that touches the heart, and pocketbook, aka when you talk about things that concerns money. And then there's also a fourth category that has emerged. And this is called transformation. So transformative topics include anything that gives a listener hope for the future, that shows how someone's life can be better tomorrow than it is at the moment because of something they've heard or seen in a program. So this is like that self-help trend or advice or rehab or fix-it programming. Before delving deeply into research, it's helpful to understand how people in your audience actually take in information. There are many more demands on people's attention now than there were in the past. Many more delivery systems where people can find the information and entertainment they're looking for. So if you don't immediately engage with your listeners, they're gone. They've got too many other choices to content. Your listeners are busy and they've been trained to have short attention spans. They're often doing more than one thing at a time while listening. The trick is to break through to each listener in the way that works best for him or her. So there are a few common themes that appeal to all people. Think about what we just said with regards to health, safety, heart, the underdog, things like that. Everyone likes clean sheets. We all hate sitting in traffic. We all hate standing in queues. And we all get bored at some point or another, okay? So these are topics and things that we all have in common regardless. As a class, if we were to list 5 points that run across the entire class with regards to things like 5 songs everyone likes, 5 things most important in your life, 5 reasons you get up in the morning, we will find commonalities. It's these themes that radio stations focus on as their expertise. So stories where people succeed despite the odds. I've mentioned that before. That's a big one. It's all about the interesting topics that will appeal to the majority of the audiences. So as we've just said, if you don't engage a listener, you will lose them. Okay, so use the topics that you know are things that people are interested in. And this is why we do research, is to figure out exactly what people are interested in. Teachers suggest that students absorb information in 3 ways. Most of us are a mix of all 3 of these learning styles. So firstly, it's auditory, hearing. Secondly, it's visual, so seeing. Thirdly, it's kinesthetic or tactile, so touching things. Most of us have one way that works the best for us out of these. While radio is not necessarily educational, Our primary goal is to entertain. So people do come to media for news and new information. If you want your messages to stick with the viewer or the listener, it's useful to know that we now have all of these tools at our disposal to reach each type of person in the audience. With traditional radio, you've got just one method, and that's auditory. But with a website or with social media, you've now added that visual component. And if your site is interactive, so involving your listeners, you can expand it further to kinesthetic or tactile people. Of course, people are individuals, not groups. Each person has his or her own interests, but when you hit the core of what people care about, so their heart, health, and money and transformation, there's commonality of human experience. Research can help you find out what kind of pocketbook, aka money, issue might be affecting people in your audience. Okay, so for example, if you know what your audience cares about, and if you can tap into that and pay attention to it, you'll get ahead. If research is done right, it can help you get ratings and learn the habits of your audience, which is exactly what you want. But a few points to consider, and I'm just going to touch on these briefly because we'll be speaking about it more in detail in the next lecture. There's no crystal ball, okay? Before you embark on an expensive research study, see who's been there before you. Perhaps the information that you seek may be easily findable elsewhere without having to commission your own costly study. What research can do, if used properly, is identify public trends and tendencies. In media, this means giving your listeners something they've been missing or more of what they say that they like. Okay, so there's no crystal ball. Remember that while there are many research techniques, the basic process involves asking the right questions, compiling the data, analyzing and interpreting the results in a manner that properly supports business intelligence and decision-making processes. Don't get intimidated by the language of research. Okay, there are two kinds of research studies: tracking studies, which tells you how you are doing, and action studies that can tell you what direction you should go into next. Okay. So while the how we are doing tracking studies can show you that you're on the right track, this research is very expensive. Before you contract with a research company, it's important to know your goals. What do you want to find out? Don't let the research company take the lead, okay? Be proactive and create the questions. The best questions in a research study are not the ones that provide interesting information. The most effective questions in a study are the ones that lead to real knowledge and change. Understanding who your listeners are, how they live, what they care about, and how they use media is crucial. Remember, you get qualitative research, which is focus groups, so quality. Then you get quantitative research, which is large sample procedures, aka numbers, okay? Make sure your research data and findings are reliable. Context is very important, so choose your sample set in a non-biased manner. That brings us to the end of this lecture. So I'm going to give you some homework to do. So what I need you to do for me is answer the following. How many times a week do you listen to radio? How long do you listen at a time? How many hours a week on average do you spend listening to the radio? How often do you listen to community radio? How often do you change the station? What is your favorite format of radio station? And where do you do most of your radio listening? And then after you've answered that, find another 5 people, ask them the same questions and see what they come back with. Okay, so with that, I'm going to say goodbye for today. For our next lecture, we're going to be continuing with research, and we're going to be looking at the Broadcasting Research Council of South Africa, and we're going to be looking at RAM diaries as well in detail. Until then, bye.